Mr. Maddox, under HOA Code 8.3.2, you're required to remove all livestock from your property within 10 days, or face a daily fine of $500. Patricia Lively leaned against the open gate like she owned it. She didn't flinch when Officer Davis shifted awkwardly beside her. She was smiling, tight-lipped, painted, and pleased. I didn't smile back. I just stepped past her and unlatched the side chain on the paddock gate. You might want to read your jurisdiction map again, Patricia. This parcel's grandfathered in under the 1974 Ad Use Zoning Clause, and I helped write the damn compliance language back when I was with the state. She blinked just once, but it was enough. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. I turned to Officer Davis. You're doing your job, I respect that. But the HOA has no authority here. This land was never part of their agreement, and as of 3 years ago, the county renewed my easement under the State Rescue Animal Clause. Want a copy? I kept my voice calm, level. This wasn't about raising hell. It was about protecting what mattered and doing it by the book. My name's Owen Maddox. I'm not a troublemaker. I don't throw lawsuits or chain myself to fences. I run a small ranch outside Cypress Hollow. My father built it after he came back from Vietnam with nothing but a limp and a vision to rescue horses too broken for service and too proud for slaughter. He died 5 years ago. I buried his boots beneath that magnolia tree behind the barn, just like he asked. The HOA didn't exist when Dad broke ground here, but over the years, neighborhoods stretched closer. Patricia Lively bought the house 3 lots down, built her empire on uniform hedges and fake community spirit. The moment I declined her offer to reconsider your fencing for neighborhood cohesion, I became a target. And now she was trying to take the horses. Not just any horses. One of them belonged to Sheriff Brogan himself. A retired service gelding with a bullet scar on his flank and a pension from the county. Patricia didn't know that part yet, but she would. The gate creaked as Officer Davis stepped back. I'll file a neutral report, he said. But this doesn't look like an HOA matter. Patricia scoffed. It's still a blight. It lowers the aesthetic value of the homes around it. That was her word, blight. Not safety concern, not nuisance. Just something she didn't like the look of. My hands curled around the post with the carved initials, my dad's. Still there beneath the sun-bleached wood. Still holding this place up. I'd be careful calling something a blight when it feeds the horses of the man who signs off on half the county's law enforcement funding, I said, voice low. Just a friendly tip. Patricia's smile slipped, but only for a breath. Where are you? Watching from? Because if you've ever had to defend something your family built with their bare hands, this story's for you. I watched her drive off in that spotless white SUV, her HOA logo proudly stamped on the door. Officer Davis nodded once, respectfully, then followed. They thought this was over, but I've seen how people like Patricia work. They use letters and bylaws and pressure. They bluff with authority they don't have, counting on your fear, your ignorance, or your isolation to give them ground. She just made the wrong assumption, that I'd roll over, that I didn't have fight left in me. She hadn't checked who else had something to lose if she pushed this too far. This was just the first move, and I never played defense for long. The next morning, I saddled Boone early. He was calm under pressure, part Tennessee Walker, part warhorse by personality. The sun hadn't yet cleared the ridge when I rode the fence line, checking for broken slats or gaps. Not because I expected trouble, but because that's what my father taught me. If you take care of the land takes care of you. By the time I got back to the barn, my neighbor Rosa was waiting by the side gate with 2 muffins and a look of concern. She came by our place last night, Rosa said, offering one. Said your livestock violation was going to hurt all our property values. Livestock violation, I echoed, not hiding the irony. Even though the livestock's been here longer than the HOA? She didn't care. Rosa's jaw tightened. Told us we'd be cited next if we didn't file a neighbor's complaint to support her case. My husband told her to leave. You know he's not the yelling type, but she pushed too far. I nodded. She's canvassing, trying to build a paper trail she can use to justify action. And trying to make us scared of you, Rosa added quietly. That one landed. She wasn't just targeting my horses now. Patricia was doing what every petty tyrant does, isolating the one she couldn't control. I took the muffin, unwrapped the paper slowly. Thanks for telling me. She's been doing this more and more, Rosa said, folding her arms. Penny 2 doors down got fined for a garden statue. That old couple near the cul-de-sac, they got written up for wind chimes. Wind chimes, I repeated. Crime of the century. Rosa didn't laugh. It's not funny, Owen. She's trying to push people out who don't fit her vision. I knew that tone. I'd heard it from state auditors and farmers and county planners alike. The voice of someone who saw the system start to rot, but didn't yet know how to stop it. After Rosa left, I went into town. Not to the sheriff, yet. I needed to see how far this went. At the co-op, word had already spread. A few folks avoided eye contact. Others gave short nods, hesitant but not unfriendly. But when I stepped into the local feed store, Gerald, owner, 73, old enough to remember when my dad started the rescue ranch, looked up and snorted. "She's poked the wrong bear this time," he said without preamble. "She's working hard to paint me as the bear." He leaned on the counter. "You know how many complaints she's filed this year? Can't be more than a dozen. 32, he said. And that's just the ones that made it to the city record. She's got this whole scheme where she files the same complaint with different phrasings until one sticks. That legal? He shrugged. Not illegal, but it's damn unethical. And that was the point. Patricia didn't need to win in court. She needed to wear people down, with letters, with fees, with nuisance reports that drained your time and broke your patience. The next day, a small group gathered near the old post office. A few familiar faces, some I'd known for decades. Rosa was there, as was Penny, and Tom from the cul-de-sac. She said if we didn't fall in line, we'd be called disruptive, Penny said, that she could have our voting rights suspended for non-compliance. Can she do that? Tom asked me, clearly nervous. No, I said, but if she says it with enough confidence, most people won't question her. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. This was a pattern, a slow campaign to sanitize a neighborhood that had never needed polishing. Patricia Lively was using HOA authority like a scalpel, cutting away anyone who didn't match her design. Ranchers, retirees, people with animals, clutter, or character. Anyone who reminded her this land had history before her board position. She wanted uniformity, order, control. She was about to meet opposition. Because this wasn't going to be won in a letter war. It was going to take facts, allies, and pressure from someone whose jurisdiction Patricia couldn't bend. And I knew exactly where to start. The HOA office sat at the end of a sterile cul-de-sac, tucked behind hedges clipped so precisely they looked like they came from a catalog. Patricia had turned the place into her personal war room, a monument to beige power. I hadn't planned to come here this soon, but I needed eyes inside. I needed to see who was with her, and who wasn't. The glass door chimed as I stepped in. There was a pause, sharp and sudden, before the front desk volunteer offered a clipped smile. I didn't return it. In the back, through a pane of frosted glass, I saw her. Patricia stood at a long table, gesturing over a spread of papers like she was planning a military operation. Miles Renteria sat opposite her, quiet, stiff, and visibly uncomfortable. He wasn't speaking, just nodding occasionally, while his fingers tapped the edge of the folder. "Miles," she said, raising her voice as she flipped through pages. "We need consistency in our documentation. These photos of the Maddox property, and angle, them wider, make the fencing look worse, more clutter. It helps support the aesthetic clause." Miles didn't respond right away. "Miles?" she repeated. He gave a slow nod, but his eyes weren't on her. They were on me. I stepped closer, knocking lightly on the glass. The room stilled. Patricia turned, expression cooling the moment she saw me. "You're not permitted back here without board approval, Mr. Maddox. Just came to see how the neighborhood paperwork machine runs," I said, keeping my tone easy. "Didn't realize you were staging a photo shoot." Miles stood quickly, papers slipping from his lap. He stooped to grab them, hands fumbling. When he straightened, his face was flushed, his jaw tight. He was cracking, and I wasn't the one pressuring him. "I was just leaving," he muttered, eyes down. But as he passed me, I caught it. His shoulder paused, just briefly near mine. A low whisper. "They're pushing the zoning envelope? She knows it." I didn't respond, just gave the barest nod. Miles exited fast, his gait uneven. The conflict was eating him from the inside out. "Is that supposed to intimidate me?" Patricia asked once the door shut. I turned back to her. "Number? That's just the sound of your board unraveling." She laughed once, short and sharp. "Don't be dramatic. You're not the first homeowner to think the rules don't apply to them. And you're not the first HOA president to think power grants jurisdiction. We're well within our rights. You're outside your boundary lines," I cut in, voice steady. "And I think you know it." Her expression didn't change, but her nails drummed harder against the table edge. "You want a war, Mr. Maddox?" she asked quietly. I met her stare. "Number? I want peace. But if you push this any further, the county's going to start asking questions you can't answer." That did it. Her lips curled. "Then by all means, go running to the sheriff." Funny she said that, because the sheriff wasn't going to be a tool I used. He was a friend Patricia didn't know she'd already crossed. Back outside, I found Miles leaning against the far wall, rubbing his temple like he'd just stepped out of a furnace. "You all right?" I asked. He looked up, startled. "You heard her in there?" "Enough." He glanced down the hall, then back at me. "She's steamrolling the board. She uses scare tactics, threatens committee removals if anyone questions her." "Why stay?" "My parents live here too," he said. "I joined to protect them from her. But she's smart. She files everything twice, stacks the records so if anything gets challenged, it looks airtight." I nodded slowly. "You saw what she said about the zoning?" He hesitated, then gave the barest nod. "She knows your parcel is ag-exempt. She's pushing it anyway. Told us not to bring up the easement unless asked directly." There it was. Intent, knowledge, willful overreach. I could feel the strategy taking shape. "You're not the only one she's pressuring," I told him. "You saw Rosa. You saw Penny. She's trying to isolate every person who won't play along." Miles looked like he wanted to say something else, but swallowed it. "I'm not asking you to go public," I said. "Not yet. But if this goes where I think it's going, I may need your help." He didn't answer, but he didn't walk away either. Good. That was enough for now. The HOA had cracks forming inside its own ranks. Patricia thought she was tightening control. She hadn't realized she was standing on a fault line. Drop a like if you've ever watched someone in power push too far, and seen the cracks form before they noticed. Subscribe now to follow this strategy from the inside, because the real unraveling is just beginning. 2 days later, I came home from the feed store to find another bright orange notice taped to my front gate. Final compliance warning. Remove all livestock within 5 days. Fines will be levied daily. HOA. Section 14.3 invoked. Ongoing violations may result in lien filing. I stood in the gravel drive, dust settling around my boots, the paper flapping in the wind like a dare. Boone neighed from the pasture behind me. I turned slowly, scanning the open land that stretched toward the tree line. Every fence post, every bale of hay stacked against the barn wall, every piece of this place that had outlasted storms, droughts, and city creep. Patricia had officially escalated. The wording was more aggressive. Ongoing violations and lien filing. She was testing what she could get away with before I pushed back. I didn't pull the notice down, not yet. I walked past it, hands in my pockets, letting it hang there like a flag she'd planted on a hill that wasn't hers. In town that afternoon, I found Gerald outside the hardware store, stacking seed bags into the back of his truck. He glanced up when he saw me and grunted. "Got your new trophy?" he asked. "Top billing on the HOA's wall of shame," I replied. "They're threatening a lien." He stopped stacking. "That's a hell of a leap." "It is, especially since they don't have jurisdiction." Gerald whistled low. "She's going for bluff and bluster now. She's betting I don't know the line between HOA covenants and county zoning." "But you do," he said. I nodded once. "And I'm about to remind her." From there, I drove straight to the county zoning office. Neutral ground, no HOA banners, no smug volunteers asking if I'd like to speak during open comment. The clerk at the desk raised her eyebrows when I placed the folded notice in front of her. "Cypress Hollow?" she asked. "Yep." She read the paper, then scanned her computer for several long minutes before she spoke again. "According to county records, your parcel is marked as agricultural legacy. Non-conforming use protections. Easement renewed in 2019. That's what I thought. She leaned back, eyeing the notice again. HOAs can make a lot of noise, but they can't override land use designations. This kind of warning, they're skating on very thin legal ice. I need that in writing, I said, for when they try to push further. We can issue a zoning boundary verification and a statement of non-applicability. Might take 48 hours. That'll do just fine. By the time I stepped out into the afternoon sun, I could feel it, the shift. The legal ground beneath Patricia's strategy wasn't just shaky, it was crumbling. I made one more stop before heading home. The sheriff's office. Sheriff Cal Brogan was in his usual spot, leaning back in his chair, boots crossed, a folder resting on his lap. His expression didn't change when he saw me. He just nodded like he'd been expecting the visit. "They're ramping up?" he asked. Threatened to lean. He raised an eyebrow. "You call zoning?" "They're drafting the verification now." He leaned forward, voice lowering. "You want me involved yet?" "Not publicly," I said. "But if they try to escalate further, I'll need someone who understands the legal fire breaks." He nodded once. "And you've still got my horses. They're safe." He smiled then, faintly. "Patricia has no idea the land she's poking around on. She's about to find out." I left the office and drove back just as the sun was hitting that golden stretch between the barn and the tree line. Boone met me at the gate. I scratched his neck and stared at the orange notice still fluttering in place. It wouldn't last much longer. Patricia had crossed the line, from aggressive to reckless, and I had just armed myself with the receipts to prove it. The next move was hers, but mine would be louder. The zoning report arrived 2 mornings later, tucked neatly inside a county envelope addressed in crisp blue ink. I opened it at the kitchen table, coffee still steaming, beside the old placemat my mother had embroidered back when this ranch house was just drywall and a dream. It was official. Cypress Hollow. HOA has no jurisdiction over parcel number 114-B. The language was firm, detailed, absolute. It cited state land use policy, agricultural grandfathering, and the 2019 renewal clause. The same clause I'd signed myself, right there in front of the notary after Dad passed. I held the paper like it was a blade, legal, clean, and perfectly weighted. But I wasn't going to wave it around, not yet. Instead, I made a copy, slid it into a folder with the HOA's violation notice, and walked out to the barn. Boone raised his head as I entered, the hay rustling under his hooves. "Got good news," I said, patting his flank. "The law's on our side. We're just going to let them hang themselves with their own rope." Later that day, I parked across from the Wake Cease HOA clubhouse, but I didn't go in. I watched. A few cars came and went. Patricia's was first, of course. The same white SUV polished to a mirror finish. She stepped out in heels too thin for a gravel lot and walked like the world owed her smooth pavement. Then I saw Miles. He pulled in slower, less eager. His tie wasn't done upright, and his shoulders slouched like the weight of every HOA form letter had finally caught up to him. I gave it 10 minutes, then walked across. Inside, the air was stale and lemon-scented, too clean, too precise. Patricia's voice carried from the back room again, something about lean paperwork templates and legal phrasing. I didn't speak to her. I handed the zoning verification to the front desk assistant, who looked at the header and blinked twice. "Have Patricia file this," I said calmly. "It supersedes everything they're trying to do." I didn't wait for a response. Out in the parking lot, I texted one more person, Sheriff Cal Brogan. "County verification in hand. Want to see it? You might want to know what they're pushing now." His reply came quick. "Be there in 30. Meet you at the paddock." When he arrived, I handed him the full copy. He read every line in silence. "Patricia tries to file a lien with this on record," he muttered. "She'll be dragging the HOA into a legal pit." "Exactly," I said. "But I want to let her take one more step, something undeniable." Cal looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "I'll keep watch. You let me know when it's time." That night, I walked the fence line again. The wind had picked up. Clouds moved low over the fields. I checked the corners, rattled the gates. Every step reminded me of my father's voice telling me to walk it like it matters. Because it does. This land wasn't just acreage. It wasn't just fencing and barns. It was where my dad recovered, where we trained abused horses back into trust, where the sheriff kept his wounded veterans, and Patricia Lively had tried to label it a blight. I wasn't going to argue anymore. The next violation they filed would be filed against the county. And the county wouldn't be kind, but I needed one more piece. I needed someone inside to confirm Patricia's next step before she took it. And I already knew who was feeling the heat. Miles had seen the boundary. He'd heard her instructions. He just didn't know yet that he wasn't alone anymore. I found Miles exactly where I figured he'd be, sitting alone on the far end of the dog park, tapping through emails like he was waiting for something to change that never did. I didn't approach right away. Watched him from across the small hill, the way his shoulders hunched in when he checked his phone, how he rubbed his temple like the messages burned behind his eyes. His body told me more than his voice ever had. He was under pressure, squeezed, and getting tired of pretending it didn't bother him. I waited until the park cleared out. When the last woman with her schnauzer left and the gate clicked shut, I made my move. He heard my boots before I got too close, didn't flinch, just let out a long sigh and stared ahead. "You picked the quiet end," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I like it when I'm not surrounded by noise." I sat next to him on the bench, careful to give him space. "Got the zoning verification. County says your HOA's way out of line." He didn't react, not with words. "They're still going to push, though," I continued. "I think Patricia's aiming to file paperwork for lien action, even though she knows it won't hold up. She's banking on noise, on fear." Miles finally spoke. "She told me to prep the notice today, said I should have it ready by Friday's board meeting. And I didn't do it," he said flatly. "I told her we needed clarification. She didn't like that." That's when he turned to me, slow, careful, like the decision cost him something. "She called my bluff, said if I kept dragging my feet, she'd motion to remove me from the board for dereliction, said I'd lose my seat, and maybe my parents would start getting notices for their yard again." There it was, not just pressure, coercion. "You know what she's doing is illegal, right?" I asked. He nodded tight. "But she's good at walking the edge, always just shy of threatening, just vague enough that nobody can call it blackmail." "I can," I said, "and so can the sheriff." That got his attention. "Sheriff Brogan?" he asked, eyes narrowing. "He boards his horses at my place, and he's not thrilled about being dragged into a zoning lie." Miles looked away, jaw tight. "She doesn't know that, does she?" "Not yet." Silence stretched. The wind picked up, dry and sharp, rustling the leaves in short bursts. "I didn't sign up for this to hurt people," Miles said finally. "I thought maybe I could help fix things from the inside, bring balance. But now I'm just part of her paper trail." "You're not," I said. "Not unless you let her pull you back in." He stared at the gravel beneath his shoes. "I don't know how to get out." "You don't have to. Just step sideways." He glanced at me. "What does that mean?" "Give me what she asked for. Not the lien notice, just the request, the message. Anything that proves she knew this property was outside her authority and pushed anyway. That's risky. So is doing nothing. But if you help me now, I'll protect your name. I'll shield you from blowback. I'm not here to burn people who tried to do right." Another long pause. Then slowly he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded printout. Email headers, plain and dated. At the top was Patricia's name and a sentence that said it all. "Don't include mention of the zoning exemption. If it's not directly asked, it's better not to complicate things." I read it twice. "She knew." Miles looked sick. "She always knows." I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my jacket. "This is the last straw, Miles. Thank you." He nodded once, hollow. "Just end it clean." I stood and offered a hand. He didn't take it, but he didn't turn away either. As I walked back toward the lot, I could feel it, the shift. The story was no longer hearsay or frustration. It was evidence, clear, documented, director. And Patricia had just stepped into county violation territory, on record with intent. "Drop a like if you've ever watched someone walk away from a bad system just in time," I said, as the gate swung open behind me. "And subscribe, because what comes next isn't a complaint, it's enforcement." I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was anxious, but because strategy has a rhythm, and mine was finally beginning to hum. I spread the papers across my kitchen table, the county verification, the HOA's violation notice, and now the smoking gun from Miles. Everything was lined up, Every document had a timestamp. And Patricia? She had crossed the line with both boots. The next morning, I drove back to the sheriff's office. I didn't call first. Sheriff Brogan met me in the hallway outside his office. He didn't ask questions, just raised an eyebrow as I handed him the envelope. He stepped inside, skimmed the first few lines of the email printout, and let out a quiet whistle. She said this in writing? She did. Told her treasurer not to acknowledge my zoning exemption unless someone brought it up directly. Brogan looked up, jaw hardening. That's willful omission. Borderline fraud, I said, and now we've got the paper trail. He exhaled slowly. She tries to pursue a lien now. It's going to trigger a county-level violation. I can forward this to the zoning commission and the county attorney. Do it. But give me a few hours first. I want her to hang herself in the meeting tonight. He smiled faintly. You're playing this clean. She buried herself. I'm just lifting the dirt. I left the envelope in his hands and walked out into the bright noon sun. It was quiet on the streets, too quiet for the kind of storm I was about to bring. Back at the ranch, I saw Miles's truck pull in slowly. He climbed out, eyes bloodshot, shoulders hunched, but he looked me in the eye when he walked up the gravel path. I wanted to see it happen, he said. You sure? He nodded once. I gave you the match. I want to watch her burn the fuse herself. I motioned toward the porch swing. We've got a few hours. Meeting's at 7. As we sat, I noticed him staring at the old fence post again, the one with my dad's initials carved deep into the grain. He built this? Miles asked. I nodded. Every rail, every stone. He believed people either respect what they inherit or they ruin it trying to pretend they earned it. Miles swallowed. She makes us feel like intruders on our own property. She won't much longer. I checked the time. 5:30. Across town, Patricia would be reviewing her meeting agenda, printing out prepared statements, maybe even rehearsing the phony concern she'd wear for the cameras. She didn't know that by 7:15, everything she filed would fall apart on record, and the sheriff wouldn't be far behind. At 6:45, Miles and I stepped into the community hall. The room was fuller than usual. Word had spread, quietly, the way things always did in Cypress Hollow when something big was about to happen. Patricia stood at the front in her usual blazer and pearls, gavel in hand, expression set like stone. I could see the smugness return to her posture the moment she spotted me in the back row. Mr. Maddox, she called with mock sweetness, so glad you could attend. Perhaps you'd like to hear your options before we move forward with your lien notice. The room murmured, but I didn't answer, not yet. Miles took his seat near the board table, his nameplate still in place. Patricia tapped the gavel. Meeting is now in session. Let's proceed with our first action item, violation case 114-B, concerning unauthorized livestock and land misuse. As outlined, the board will vote tonight to initiate lien procedures. That's when I stood. Before you vote, I said, voice steady, you should see this. I handed a stack of copies to the front row, already watching phones light up. Patricia's eyes darted to the page, then narrowed. It was her email, and the zoning letter, and the violation notice she'd pretended was legally enforceable, all stacked together. The board hadn't even started voting yet, but the silence in the room told me she'd already lost. Patricia didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. She stared at the email in her hands like she could will the words off the page. Her smile didn't just crack, it collapsed. The room, once orderly and indifferent, shifted with it. You could feel the air lean toward me. One of the board members, Linda, I think, whispered something sharp enough to turn heads. Another murmured, "Is this real?" And then all at once phones lit up, pages turned, people moved. I didn't raise my voice. I filed nothing publicly, I said. I gave you all the courtesy in the world, but I don't let bullies trespass, and I sure as hell don't let them lie. Patricia looked up, eyes tight. You're not a board member. You don't have the floor. You made my land the floor the moment you taped that orange notice to my gate. I stepped forward one pace, and I've been holding every receipt since. Miles shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable, but he didn't flinch. When Patricia turned toward him, her voice was venom. You leaked this? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Her eyes flared, then cooled as she turned to the rest of the board. This is nothing. Zoning exceptions are outdated. They were renewed in 2019, I cut in. Signed, stamped, and on county record. You knew. You told your treasurer not to mention it unless asked. I handed copies of the same verification to the remaining board members. And if you move forward with that vote tonight, I continued, you'll be in violation of state zoning law, not just civil breach, intentional misrepresentation. That's a county matter. Linda looked up from the paper. Patricia, did you seriously omit this? Patricia straightened. It's not omission, it's strategy. No, it's fraud, Miles said quietly. And I'm not going down with you. He slid a flash drive across the table. Every version of every letter she told me to draft. I backed them up off the server. Gasps, phones raised, someone started filming. That's when the double doors opened in the back, and Sheriff Cal Brogan walked in. He didn't say a word at first, just tipped his hat and slowly walked to the front of the room. He stood beside me without prompting. Just his presence shifted the energy again, this time heavy and final. Evening, he said calmly. I've just come from the county attorney's office. I filed a preliminary inquiry based on documentation submitted regarding misuse of HOA authority and violation of zoning protections. Patricia froze. Her voice dropped to something brittle. This is outrageous! No, ma'am, the sheriff said. What's outrageous is filing threats of lien on property you don't control, after knowingly hiding that information from your own board. The room had fully turned now, and Patricia knew it. This is politically motivated, she snapped. Personal favors? Careful, the sheriff said, his voice cool now. Because the county doesn't see this as political. They see it as procedural abuse, and they don't take kindly to people interfering with protected veteran equine programs either. That part hit the hardest. People didn't know the horses on my ranch had once served, didn't know they'd been wounded in service, like their handlers, didn't know Brogan had kept his promise to retire them with dignity. But they knew now. Patricia looked around and saw only backs stiffening, eyes narrowing, not one supporter speaking in her defense. She tried to gather her things. This board will be hearing from my attorney. But no one moved. Linda cleared her throat. Motion to table the vote indefinitely? Miles seconded it before she finished the sentence. The sheriff turned to me. You want her prosecuted? I looked around the room, then shook my head once. I want her removed. Let the county handle the rest. He nodded, then turned to the board. She won't be filing anything else for now. I'd suggest reviewing your bylaws closely. As Patricia stormed out, her heels echoing across the tile, I turned to the crowd. I glanced back at the porch swing, already imagining the weight lifted. The war was almost over, and justice had just found its voice. The next morning, I walked the fence line at sunrise. For the first time in weeks, it wasn't a patrol, it was a ritual. The wind rolled gentle across the pasture. Boone lifted his head, but didn't trot over. Even he could feel it. The pressure that had hung over this place like storm clouds had finally cracked. But a victory like this doesn't clean itself up. I wasn't done yet. Back inside, I spread the documents out again, this time not for defense, but preparation. The sheriff had paused Patricia's reach, but there was still a mess under the surface. The HOA had been operating on bad faith for longer than just my case, and if I let it go now, it would all happen again to someone else. I wasn't looking for vengeance, but I knew what justice felt like now, and I wasn't about to let it slip through my fingers. So I made a list, names, dates, incidents, neighbors like Penny, who got a violation for garden statues, Tom and Sharon slapped with fines for bird feeders, Rosa pressured with veiled threats over her bilingual mailbox sign, all isolated, all pushed into quiet compliance. Patricia hadn't acted alone, but she'd been the architect, and I had just pulled the blueprint out from under her. At noon, I met with Sheriff Brogan again, this time in a quieter place, his office off the main square. I'm not asking for a crusade, I told him, but the board needs to be reviewed, all of them. He nodded. You've got cause, and with Patricia gone, the others will be scrambling to cover their tracks. I've got more than cause. I placed the list on his desk. I've got testimony. Rosa agreed to speak on record. So did Penny. Miles is drafting a full statement about what Patricia ordered internally. Brogan scanned the list. You're building a case file. I'm building accountability. He smiled faintly. You ever think about running for the board yourself? I shook my head. I'm not interested in power. I just want the rules to apply the way they're supposed to." He leaned back. "You know, that's usually how the best leaders start." I left his office and headed straight to the community center. Rosa met me out front, eyes wary but determined. "You sure about this?" she asked. "Only thing I've been sure of all year." She smiled then. "Let's go tell the truth." Inside, the interim board was already posted, Miles included. They'd scheduled a community hearing to open the floor for concerns, an effort to rebuild trust. I stepped up to the front with Rosa beside me. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. "I'm not here to drag names," I said. "I'm here to fix a pattern." I laid out the violations, mine and my neighbors, all backed by HOA correspondence, timeline inconsistencies, and zoning violations. One by one, we listed what had been ignored, what had been buried, what had been threatened, and no one interrupted. By the time we finished, you could hear breathing shift. The weight of realization settled in the room like dust in still air. Miles stood. I moved to initiate an audit of all violations issued in the past 12 months. It passed unanimously. As we stepped outside, Rosa turned to me. "You could have left it. You got your win." I nodded. But then she still would have won too, just quieter. That night, I sat on the porch swing, the one Dad built by hand the summer I turned 16. The rope creaked softly in the breeze. The stars were out, and the ranch was quiet. I reached down and touched the carved initials in the wood. Not just his, mine now too. "Drop a like if you've ever had to clean up after someone else's power trip," I said quietly. "And subscribe, because next, we're building something worth protecting." The audit team arrived early. 3 volunteers from the county HOA compliance division, armed with clipboards, tablets, and a kind of polite authority that made even the most seasoned board members squirm. They weren't here to arrest anyone or file lawsuits. They were here to verify everything. I welcomed them from the barn walkway, shook hands, and handed over my file of evidence without ceremony. "We've already reviewed the zoning boundaries," one of them said, "but we're especially interested in how Patricia used internal policy to bypass land use exemptions. This kind of overreach usually has fingerprints." "She didn't act alone," I said plainly, "but she was the conductor." While they settled into the community center, I made rounds with the neighbors. Rosa had clipped every notice she'd received and sorted them by tone and handwriting. Penny had taken photos of every garden statue since 2017, complete with timestamps. Tom and Sharon had printed out HOA newsletters with contradictory instructions about decorative lighting, evidence scattered like breadcrumbs through years of quiet frustration. I gathered it all. Then I stepped inside the clubhouse, not as an outsider anymore, but as someone whose name carried weight. Miles met me at the door. "You ready?" he asked, holding the flash drive we'd backed up twice. "Been ready," I said. She just thought I'd never walk through the door. The interim board gathered in full. No one sat in Patricia's old seat. It stayed conspicuously empty, like a placeholder for what not to become. Linda opened the session. "Today's agenda includes a presentation of collected evidence concerning past board overreach, with particular emphasis on zoning, citation inconsistencies, and procedural violations." She looked to me. "Mr. Maddox, if you'd like the floor." I stepped forward and plugged in the drive. The monitor lit up with our compiled report. Every photograph, every county ruling, every quote from Patricia's own emails. But I didn't start with legal language. I started with legacy. "This board inherited a system built on trust," I said. "We don't all have the same houses. We don't all fly the same flag. But we moved here for peace, for pride, for a sense of home." I pointed to the screen. That trust was broken when the HOA became a weapon instead of a shield. The room was silent, focused. Even the people who once avoided eye contact now leaned forward. I showed the zoning exemption. I showed the email where Patricia instructed omissions. I showed Rosa's timeline of notices. 6 in 6 months, most of them signed in pen by Patricia alone. And then I let the audit team speak. They confirmed what we already knew. Patricia had overridden standard approval processes. She'd drafted documents herself that should have required board votes. She had even tampered with timestamps on 2 digital violations to push them into the new enforcement period. Linda turned pale. Miles looked like someone had finally opened a window. After an hour, we voted, not just to strike the violations, but to censure Patricia Lively and permanently bar her from future HOA leadership. The vote passed without a single voice in opposition. Then came the second vote. Miles stood up. "I nominate Owen Maddox for Special Compliance Liaison, non-voting position, advisory role, elected by homeowners, not appointed by the board." I didn't expect that, but the room did. The hands rose like a wave. I accepted. But not with a speech, just a nod, a handshake, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the best leaders are the ones who never wanted to lead, but couldn't stay silent. That evening, I walked back through the pasture. The orange notice was long gone. In its place, I hung a small, weathered sign at the front gate. It read simply, "Cypress Hollow Horse Rescue. EST. 1983. Protected. Peaceful. Permanent." The community meeting was packed. Not the usual trickle of polite attendees sipping lukewarm coffee. This time, the folding chairs were full before 7, and neighbors were lining the back wall. Even folks I hadn't seen in months were there. Mr. Singh from the orchard parcel on the West End, the Delgados with their twin toddlers, and old Mrs. Winslow, wrapped in a floral shawl and holding a petition clipboard like a weapon. People weren't just here to listen. They were ready to act. The board sat at the front as always, but their tone was different now. Nervous, open, tentative. Miles adjusted his collar as he scanned the room. Linda held the meeting gavel in both hands, like she wasn't sure if she'd need to use it or surrender it. This wasn't going to be about me anymore. It was about what came next. Linda cleared her throat. "This session has been called in response to community petition under HOA Code 4.73- Public Oversight Hearing, triggered by 30 or more signatories." She glanced at the back. Mrs. Winslow nodded without a word, then sat down with the calm of a matriarch who knew her work was done. Linda continued. "The floor is now open for homeowner grievances tied to enforcement patterns under former President Patricia Lively's tenure." And then it began. Rosa stood first, her voice firm. "In 2022, I was fined for bilingual signage on my mailbox. I was told it violated community aesthetic standards, but no such clause exists. I appealed. Patricia denied it before the board reviewed. The Delgados followed. We got cited 3 times for having toys in our front yard. Once for a tricycle. Patricia said it was visual clutter. Mr. Singh stood with a printed packet. She threatened me with fines for not trimming trees that fall outside HOA-managed areas. She knew I had medical exemptions filed with the county, and still, she filed anyway. On and on it went. Every story added weight. Every name chipped away at the illusion of authority Patricia had built. But it wasn't until Miles stood that the mood shifted from outrage to reckoning. "I served under Patricia for 3 years, he began, his voice shaky but loud enough to carry. "I thought I could temper things from the inside, but I let things slide. I stayed quiet. I knew what she was doing, and I didn't fight hard enough." He paused, looked at the crowd, then at me. "I came to Owen a few weeks ago because I couldn't keep looking the other way. What he exposed was just the start. Patricia created a culture of fear, selective enforcement, intimidation, and silence. And we let her." He turned to Linda. "I'm stepping down after this vote, but before I do, I'm asking for one more motion. An open floor vote on whether to dissolve the current board structure and elect a full community review committee." It was bold, bolder than I expected, and the room erupted with support. Linda didn't hesitate. "Motion accepted. All in favor?" The hands flew up. 80%. Miles looked at me once more, then sat, relief washing over his face like someone finally breathing again after years underwater. After the vote, neighbors swarmed the sign-up tables. Rosa hugged Penny. Tom clapped me on the back like we'd won a championship game. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the sheriff slipped in, gave me a nod, and leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, watching the people do what people should have been allowed to do all along. Take ownership of their homes, their voices, their peace. That night, I passed by the magnolia tree, its blossoms just beginning to open. I paused beneath it, hand brushing the bark. Dad would have hated the politics, but he'd have understood the fight. He always said that the best fences aren't just built to keep things out. They're built to show where you stand. I didn't go to sleep that night, right away. Instead, I stayed out under the magnolia tree, boots resting against the roots that had split the earth wide open when I was still too young to understand why my father insisted we plant it near the heart of the land. It had grown knotted and wild over the years, kind of like the people it protected. Above me, stars blinked quietly. I could still hear the echo of chairs scraping across the community hall floor, people laughing for the first time in weeks. Real laughter, not nervous chuckles in the shadow of Patricia's fake civility. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full. The next few days moved fast. The temporary board stepped down without protest. A new election was scheduled. Real candidates this time. Neighbors who never thought they'd be part of something like this were organizing house by house, handing out flyers that didn't feel like threats, knocking on doors to ask, not demand, support. Rosa dropped off a folded paper with a smile. "I'm running," she said, "and whether I win or not, I want my daughter to know I stood up." Penny and Tom offered to coordinate the bylaws review. The Delgados asked if I'd host a meeting at the ranch, just to make sure everyone felt like they had a seat at the table. I didn't say yes right away. I just told them I'd think about it, not because I didn't care, but because I was tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from defeat, but from holding a line longer than anyone should have had to. I spent that afternoon repainting the porch swing, the same swing where my dad used to drink coffee before sunrise, the same swing where I'd sat with Miles when everything cracked open. I sanded it down, let the old flakes scatter into the grass, then coated it in a shade of deep walnut, clean, rich, honest. While the paint dried, I rewired the floodlight over the front gate. Not because I was worried anymore, but because I wanted the boundary line to shine, not as a warning, as a welcome. Brogan stopped by before sunset, a brown bag of feed in his arms. "Heard you're the neighborhood hero now," he said, setting it down with a grunt. "I'm just the guy who got tired of reading threats taped to his fence." He chuckled, real low. Funny thing about people like Patricia, they count on the silence more than the rules. Break that, and they've got nothing. He didn't stay long, just left a handshake in the name of a guy he trusted to help revise community security procedures. Someone neutral. When he drove off, I sat on the swing again, letting the scent of wood oil rise beneath the evening breeze. I could still feel the outlines of Dad's initials, even though I'd sealed them in with fresh varnish. The letters were carved deep enough that time couldn't erase them. Legacy isn't something you inherit. It's what you defend when no one else will. Inside, I lit the stove, cooked a quiet dinner, and listened to the muffled sounds of horses shifting in the barn, calm, steady, like they finally believed we'd won, because we had. No more notices, no more fake deadlines, no more being treated like an inconvenience in our own homes. We didn't just stop Patricia. We reclaimed the rules, reclaimed our voices, reclaimed peace. If you've ever fought back with facts instead of fists, drop a like right now. And if this story gave you hope, hit that subscribe button, because stories like this don't end with headlines. They end with people like you doing the same in your own towns, for your own homes. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it shows up in boots, builds a fence, and makes damn sure it stands. Tell me in the comments, what's the worst HOA stunt you've had to deal with? Or just let me know where you're watching from. You're not alone anymore.